Okay, a few weeks ago, you guys wrote some free responses in class about courts, and I wanted to go over those with you. Unfortunately, I didn't get them graded and back to you before school ended. I've got them. If you want to see, a picture or something, I can take a picture and email it to you. The grade's in the book, but I wanted to go over them just sort of generally, so you know some things I was looking for and some things that I saw and what I was thinking. And what I've done is I have uploaded the prompts and put them on the home page under downloads. So I would encourage you to have those prompts in front of you when you watch this video so that we are talking about the same thing as far as the questions. If you remember, the first question was one that everybody wrote on, and Alexander Hamilton made a statement that the court would be the least powerful branch. And then your job was to either agree with that statement and defend it, or disagree with it and defend that as well. And so what you were asked to do is to have 4 paragraphs, and in the first would be your thesis. I agree with Alexander Hamilton's statement that the court is the least powerful branch because, or I disagree, either one was fine, and about half of you agreed and half of you disagreed. Second paragraph, supporting argument number 1. So if you were defending the statement that the court was the least powerful branch, you could say, for example, one reason that I believe the court is the least powerful branch is that they cannot enforce their own decisions. They rely on the other branches to implement, and you could talk about the video we saw, Eyes on the Prize and Brown v. Board. You could talk about the Trail of Tears and make your argument there. The next paragraph would then be a different supporting argument. And you wanted to make sure that these 2 arguments were distinct and separate. Because on the AP exam, basically you're getting a point for each argument you make, so you want to make sure that they're different. So you could have said something, for example, like the court can interpret a law, but they can't pass a law. A court can't tax people, they don't have the power of the purse, something like that. That's distinct from this one. And then your 4th argument was what we call the rebuttal, where you're taking on an argument against your position and then shooting it down. So if you were arguing that the court is in fact the least powerful branch, you would say something like this. In Brutus 15, the author argued that the court would be the most powerful because, and then go on to repeat that argument. But then what you want to go on to do is you also need to say, this argument fails because. So this is what Brutus' argument was, but it's wrong because. And so that's what a rebuttal is. It's not just repeating an argument against your side, but then shooting it down as well. One other thing with these arguments. For those of you who were arguing that you agreed with Hamilton, some of you for your argument put something like, as Hamilton wrote in Federalist 70, the judges need to serve for a lifetime because then they're free from political pressure. And he did write that in Federalist 70. But that doesn't really support your thesis that the court is the least powerful. It's explaining why they have a lifetime term, but it doesn't support your thesis. So make sure that when you make a supporting argument, it really does support exactly what your thesis is. Okay, so everybody wrote that first one. And then after that, you had a choice between 2 different prompts which looked a little different. And the second and third prompts were broken down sort of A, B, C, D, and you could choose one of them. And the first prompt said it was about the court and public opinion. So, and what you wanted to do, the question was A, B, C, D, so your answer wanted to be A, B, C, D. And for A, it said, identify one constitutional provision that insulates the court from public opinion. And what you want to do then is use the exact words from the prompt in your response. So you would say literally exactly what it said in the prompt, one constitutional provision that insulates the court is, and then go on to say what it is, lifetime terms, or they're not elected, or they can't have their pay cut, or something like that. So you want to use the exact words in your answer. It's not an English class, it's not an essay, nobody's going to accuse you of plagiarizing. What you want to do is make sure you use the exact words from the question so that you are answering the exact question that is asked and not a different one. And that also makes it easier for the AP reader to then give you the point or the check that you deserve because they know exactly what you're responding to. Same thing in B. B was, despite this, courts rarely stray too far from public opinion. And so what you want to do with B is use the exact words and say, courts rarely stray too far from public opinion because, and then say what you have to say, and then the same thing in C and the same thing in D. And C and D also asked you to give a real or hypothetical example, so make sure that you did that. A couple of writing things that I wanted to mention. First of all, this may sound minor, but it's not, and it has to do with capitalization. This is a democratic idea, small d, versus this is a democratic idea with a big D, capitalized D. The only difference is whether you capitalize the D, but those two mean two very different things. This means that this is an idea that is consistent with democracy. The idea of electing our leaders as opposed to having a hereditary king is a democratic idea with a small d. This means that this is an idea of the Democratic Party. Raising the minimum wage is a democratic big D idea. So you want to be very, very clear. If you're talking about the Democratic Party or the Republican Party or a Democratic politician or a Republican politician, that you are using that capital letter. And that may seem like a small thing, but it matters. Also, one other thing when you're writing these responses for the AP exam, don't use pronouns. It may sound awkward, but it doesn't matter what it sounds like. What you're going for in the AP Gov exam is not beautiful writing, but clarity, precision. So you don't want a sentence that says something like, they can check them when they use it. It might be obvious from the context what you mean if you read everything around it, but it might not be. So to be perfectly clear, what you want to say is the Supreme Court can check Congress when the Supreme Court uses judicial review. And maybe that sounds awkward because you're using the Supreme Court twice in a row, and it may not be the way you usually write, but for the AP Gov exam, stay away from pronouns, just say what you mean. And then sometimes what you're going to find out is when you try to replace the pronoun with the actual noun, you're not sure what you meant in the first place, and it's going to force you to be a little more precise in your thinking. Okay, the second prompt that was A, B, C, D had to do with judicial nominations and factors that presidents consider. The first one said, identify one similarity and one difference between Obama's and Bush's judicial nominees based on the graph, and it gave you the graph. And so what you wanted to say is one similarity between is this. And then some of you went on to say, and the reason for that similarity is because they were both men, so they were both more likely to appoint men. It didn't ask you why. It didn't ask you to explain. It just said identify a similarity and identify a difference, and that's all you had to do. And when you did it, be as precise as possible. So some of you said something like, well, Obama's nominees were more diverse. Well, diversity could mean a lot of things, not just race. So what you want to do is be specific and say Obama appointed a higher percentage of African Americans than Bush did. And then you want to use the numbers and say Obama appointed, I think it was, let's see, Obama appointed 22% of Obama's nominees were African American, whereas only 7% of Bush's were African American. And you don't have to explain why. Just say this is a difference, but a similarity is they were both more likely to appoint men. Obama appointed 54% men, and George Bush appointed 78% men. So be precise. And then it asked you 3 factors presidents consider besides what was mentioned here. And a lot of you talked about things like age or good character or something like that, and those were all fine. But in the question, I bolded the phrase politically relevant because it said not only identify the factor, but explain why it would be politically relevant. So what you wanted to make sure that you did is in that B, use that phrase. Okay. A nominee's age could be politically relevant because if he or she is too old, the Senate is less likely to confirm. Something like that, because that's politically relevant. And then C, it asks you to identify 2 real, actual people who were Supreme Court nominees who didn't get the job. And some of you kind of like said, well, there was one person who had something bad in his record, or some person who didn't pay his taxes. I was looking for a specific person and a specific reason why that person didn't get the job. And that all came from that Hall of Shame PowerPoint. You didn't need to give me the name, but I did want you to give me the specifics. There was one person who didn't get it because he was too conservative. There was another because he smoked pot with his students. So give me 2 specific instances or examples of people who got nominated by the president to be on the Supreme Court, but then didn't get it because they got rejected by the Senate. Email me if you have any questions.